Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the live stream on Wednesday, March 15th, 2023. And I'm drinking tea, hot tea. There's something about a hot beverage first thing in the morning that is just absolutely fantastic. Even in the summertime, just so good. Good morning, Thinker. As always, welcome. Okay, we are on to the last palm frond, except for this little bit of palm frond over there. I'm not really counting that. That'll take just a second to put in. But we're on this little beast over here. It's gonna be fun, to put it lightly. The reason why it's gonna be fun is because it is very complex. There's all kinds of things going on there. So we have all kinds of leaves going in different directions. And then we have a background leaf that's kind of coming up this way. So yeah, a lot happening down here. Lots of stripes, basically. So accomplishing this, making it look authentic, and keeping it from detracting attention from our main interest, which is the tiger up at the top, or at least the head of the tiger specifically, is going to be a challenge. But the first thing, you know, anytime we have challenges in any way, something difficult, the best thing to do is to break it down into steps. Our first priority is to get the drawing right and the value right. That's it. That's all we have to worry about. Let's get the leaves in there and let's get the value right. Good morning, Villa Boys. Nice. So, getting the drawing right, getting the value right, and the other thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on some relative color. What do I mean by relative color? Relativity happens everywhere in your paint, regardless if you want to or not. But what I mean by relative color is using what's around it to inform the colors that we choose. And holy cow, my blue is just about dry. It is so thick. I'm gonna have to replace it, it's too thick. It's been on the palette way too long. So relative color, in this instance, everything around this palm frond at the bottom has a very gray cast to it. You know, it's neutral. It's close to the center of the color wheel. It's as far away from, well, it's really far away from the original color that comes right out of the tube of any of these paints. We've neutralized them by adding in their complementary. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up my darkest dark. And we're going to keep it closer to green. I'm actually going to add a sap green to it this time. Last time I added that Courbet green, which I don't have a lot of. I just got a sample tube, but I like that green. It's kind of like a grayish green. All right, so this is the darkest dark. It'll be close to gray. And I'll just put, because I have a lot of it in my brush right now, so I'll just put a bit of it right there, and then I'm going to add a chunk of white to it. Fairly large chunk of white. And it's got a very bluish green tone to it that is also looks gray on my palette, looks close to gray on my palette, but what does it look like next to the darker colors down here? Well, first off, it's really bright. It's the same value as the gray tone of the canvas, so that's too bright. And I'm wondering if it's too warm. And what's interesting is, we were talking about it yesterday. See, I'm going off of my iPad here as far as coloration, as far as, what I'm looking at. But my iPad has a very warm tone to it. And I'm thinking that it may have that setting turned on to it where it turns the screen kind of warm. I forget what it's called. To like help your eyes at night. It's like a night shift or something. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. Let's see. Yep. It's been on this whole time. Wow, that's interesting. Let's see how different this looks now. I remember throughout, the past painting sessions, I've been constantly saying, wow, this just looks really dark on my iPad. It also looked way too warm on my iPad as well. Lesson learned there. Holy cow, all the colors are different. Revelation. It is so different now what I'm looking at. That's fantastic. Okay. I can see so much more as well. All right, well, lesson learned on that. So what you're looking at on your screen and what I'm looking at on my screen are in front of me. Every screen is going to be different. So we always need to kind of take that into account when judging color in a lot of ways. Anywhere, especially if we're looking digitally. Like, well, what is the settings for this screen? Yeah, definitely a lot more teal in this one. Overall, it's very cool. It's a bit lighter from what I'm looking at. Okay, so I made this screen a bit darker. And I'm trying to get a relative value here. Actually, now that I'm looking at my screen in a different way, I think this color is good. What I'm also going to do, well, maybe not today. No, I'm not going to mess with it today. I was going to jump into some medium, some Galkid light, but I don't have a top for it or a place to put it, so I won't worry about that right now. Okay. So I really simplified this. If you see on my palette, I have this grayish green. And honestly, I think we could go even more gray with it. But I have it going from dark to light. The lightest I want it to the darkest I want it. So how would I gray this out even more? Well, we could look at our color wheel, and we're probably, in a bluish green area, which is around here. So anything in the reddish, like alizarin, permanent, transparent earth orange, which we already have on the palette, is going to grade, neutralize it even more. So I can put that color on the side and just drag it up and down the side here. There's all these ways to mix colors on your palette that doesn't involve just throwing it directly into the paint that you've already mixed up. That can kind of help you ease into changing the color that you have, or creating a new color that you have. So you can do optical mixtures in that way. Yeah, that's a bit more warm, maybe too warm. So let's mix these together a bit more. And now I have even more subtle value change as well. I think almost too much. We can lighten it up down here and then drag it up somewhat. Yeah, this is really gray now, but it's still gonna look very green compared to everything down here on the canvas. So where do we start? When you're looking at an area of complexity like this, the best place to start is what is easiest. What you can, and what do I mean by that? What you can look at in the image and understand right away. And you look at it and you go, okay, I can pretty much figure out that section. It's the simplest section, whatever you look at in that way. And I see this kind of a little small piece of this palm frond kind of coming out this way. It only has 3 leaves to it. It's very simple. And I may do this a bit differently because what I'm going to do is I'm going to treat it as one big chunk, one big form. So it goes out this way, makes like this kind of triangle shape. Not going to worry about the value change just yet. Just drawing out the entirety of the form. And then just with light paint, not very heavy paint, filling in that form. And that's the shape that I see. Yeah, exactly like that. Now, the next thing I'll do is define the form a little bit better. So let's dip into our darker green, gray, or darker grayish color. Let's make it darker down this way. Maybe a bit darker. Because remember, we're mixing on the canvas now. If you have paint already down and you want to change the color of what's already down, you have to add paint to it that's a bit further than what you want, so that when it mixes, it meets in the middle. If I have a black down and I want to make a gray, you don't mix up a gray and put it in the black, you put white on it so that it turns to gray because it'll mix with the black. And then let's darken up this side. So treating this as one whole form. Has this really nice turn to it. And then I'm going to use a second brush for the lighter greens. It looks very green to me, but it's really darn gray. Okay, and then what I like about these is they have these kind of highlight. A definite highlight throughout this whole palm frond. It kind of flows in a circle, like in a half of an ellipse. Now what you'll notice is that I'm really taking my time. I'm going to get a third brush out. This is going to be a smaller brush. Much smaller. It's actually a Monarch Zero. And in it, I'm going to mix up my darkest dark again. Ultramarine blue, burnt umber. And for this one, I'm going to add in some of that Courbet green. And then we're going to separate these leaves by drawing them out. I don't normally do it this way. Honestly, I figured, let's try it. So, there we go. We're trying it. The problem that I could have with this is when you treat a form this way as one whole piece and then you paint the negative space within it, it tends to not look like negative space. It could look like you painted stripes on top of a form. And that's all about the edges. You have to go back and forth between the negative and the positive shapes. How would you normally do it? Just each leaf at a time, basically. I would, and we'll do it on this next one here. So, because it has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 leaves and very different combinations. So I'm going to draw them out all separately with the dark in between them. Or the dark areas in between. All right, we're going to go back to our darkest green gray brush. The only reason why I did it on this one was because it seemed like one big shape to me, so I just went with it. Now what I'm doing is I'm cleaning up these edges. Well, not cleaning them up. I'm actually softening the edges a bit more. I'm going to bump up the highlights a bit more as well. Yeah, so I have a method for painting, but it's definitely not strict. I have no problem with making changes to my, the method that I use. Trying something different. If the subject matter warrants it. If what I'm looking at, I think I could use a different method that is more efficient, I'll definitely do it. No problem. And my hand is shaky this morning. Working that small is not easy right now. Okay, that's not too bad. I'm gonna leave that there. Now let's go into the other way of doing it. I'm going to touch into this kind of mid-gray that I've made up. It's not the lighter color, it's a mid-gray color. And I just turned it to a lighter gray because I dipped into too much of that white. So I'll bring some of this darker color down. You see how I've kind of simplified everything? I'm not, because it's a complex object that I'm working with, I'm worried about the drawing first, and then not a bunch of crazy color in here, just a value of green from dark to light, and getting the value in the drawing right. We can add in all those extra colors, all that extra interest later. You know, it's one of those things where you know your subject a bit more. I got some drawing on here that, because the line that I have here from the initial drawing, is that correct? Not really. It kind of has an arch to it that's that way. And I'm not going to fill in these leaves yet. What I'm going to do is establish their location. So the easiest one I see is on is on this side. It's a grouping of 3. That could probably end about right there. Then we have a big space that opens up. You know, see, the problem here is I really didn't do much on that drawing at all. It's not really a problem. All it did is just leave it for me to do right now. I could have, you know, used our drawing checking method that, you know, that I showed within, you know, one of the previous streams, and really got this drawing down, and then I wouldn't really have to worry about the location of each of these palm frond leaves. It would have been a bit easier. But we don't have to make everything super easy all the time. Yeah, keep it challenging in some way. So there's another leaf here. It's a little bit shorter, actually. In the digital ref, I see a group of stripes, individual leaves, side on, very subtle, below the 8 leaves. Are you going to put those in? They kind of point back to the tiger. Yeah, I like those. It really adds a lot of interest down there. Definitely going to add those in. I'm worried about the more prominent leaves first. And you know, those were a bit easy. But I feel like if I did those first, and now you got me thinking about it. Maybe I should do those first. But as I'm thinking about it, as we're talking about it here, I'm thinking I can establish these and then put those in pretty easily. Just a bunch of like kind of random stripes going at that angle, and it'll look fine. The more important, it's kind of like, is this one here, getting this one to look authentic. I'm going to treat this grouping of leaves as one shape while I'm drawing with a brush right now. Just while I'm drawing it. There's a tip here and then 2 tips there. That's always helpful when drawing out anything is, if you can group things like this together and get kind of the basic shape within drawing first, and then separate them further, it is a bit easier to do it that way. And you can get a lot more accuracy. I like to look at, maybe the tips of them and where they end. Throw those in. And now I go back through and get the shape and the thickness of each one. It's probably very difficult for you to see this drawing. It's actually very difficult for me to see the drawing as well that I'm doing. Only when I fill this in will we both understand how close I've gotten to it. Actually, it would be easier to see if I put in like a darker background. But if I do this, I need to be really thin with it because I have to go over it again with those stripes. So I think what I'll do is just kind of an outline here. Or at least in some of these places that are deeper into the spaces of these fronds. I'm going to keep it dry and kind of scrub it on. I mean, this is a very tedious part of the painting. Probably the most tedious part of the painting, except for the other palm fronds. It's a little bit like chess as well. I mean, you're always kind of thinking ahead. And it's especially helpful when I got another brain on the stream that's helping me think ahead, so I appreciate that. So this is great. Not even 10 minutes into the stream, there's two things that I pointed out that I've kind of made a mistake on. One of those was, making sure that the screen that I'm looking at for my reference has better coloration to it. And honestly, I don't think you have to go too deep into the calibration of screens and things like that. And then the other thing that, mistake that I learned was when the drawing is complex like this, do it within graphite first. Don't leave it later for paint, because it's a lot harder to draw with a paintbrush. So whenever you point out things like that, whenever you notice things like that, really kind of review them in your head. I mean, you could make mistakes like this all the time, but if you don't really think about it, if you don't really point it out, kind of talk it out, like, oh, okay, so next time when I do something similar to this, I need to make sure that, well, my iPad's good now. It doesn't have that night shift to it, so I don't need to make that decision again. But anytime I'm dealing with some kind of stripe-like foliage, make sure I work harder on that drawing within graphite first. It's so easy for you to make one mistake and then continually making that mistake as you go from painting to painting. You say, I noticed that you put a paint stroke down and then pretty much leave it. I have a really hard time doing that. Any tips? I think I really need to be much more accurate in color mixing on the paint palette. That's a really good point. It kind of goes along with what I was talking about the other day. When you look at professional artists, artists that you look up to in some way. And that could be anybody. Hopefully it's not me. Please don't look up to me. Someone that's really good at their craft, and whatever fashion that is. They don't have to be professional. Maybe they're better than you in some way, and they're doing something a little bit better. The one thing that you'll notice is that they work slowly and accurately. Especially like the real pros. If you ever watched videos of Richard Schmid painting, I mean, he's just taking his time, talking with the crowd, just do a few strokes, and then all of a sudden it's like the face is there. Speed isn't about throwing the paint on quickly, and this is part of the point I want to make to your question, thinker. It's not about putting it down quickly. And this is the same holds true with digital. It's not about just throwing it down really quickly and getting it on the canvas, because really you're kind of hoping that you're accurate in a lot of ways. You're hoping that you're accurate in color, drawing first, then value, then hue, saturation, all these things, edges, you're dealing with it all at the same time. So, take your time, go for accuracy, really think things out. And as far as putting it down and leaving it, I think, you've kind of answered the question already. It's all about accuracy. And I don't want to say longevity gets you there, but that's part of the equation. Part of the equation is spending the time. The other part of the equation, this comes directly from Peak by Anders Ericsson, The Science of Expertise. He did decades of research on what makes people good at what they do. And reviewed a lot of musicians, a lot of, I think mainly musicians. And what he found is, yes, the people that have spent the most time practicing are the best at what they do. This is where the 10,000 hour thing comes from. Masters of a craft have spent 10,000 hours on it in some form or fashion. Okay. And that number is not accurate. It depends on the person. Could be less, could be more. But another part of that expertise, science of expertise equation is deliberate practice, he calls it, where you consistently, you have a goal that you want to achieve in the painting, a clear goal. You have a set time that you work. It's a bit outside of your comfort zone, so it's a little bit difficult for you. And you have feedback at the end. That's probably one of the most important things. So for example, let's say that you're working on a painting right now. The best possible thing that you can do is identify your weaknesses as an artist right now, whatever that may be, and think about the fundamentals here, the foundation for art, because all art, no matter, well, all representational art is just a rigorous application of the fundamentals, all the way down to the smallest level. Composition, drawing, perspective, form, and then color. Yeah. Edges at the end, these kind of things. You can rank them in order. So think about, and yeah, I would write this down, definitely, since we're talking about it. And this is for you, thinker, specifically, because you asked the question. And for anybody else that's listening, write down what you think is the biggest thing, or your most difficult thing that you know that you need to improve upon. For most artists, that's going to be drawing. And within drawing, it's perspective. Well, there's dexterity. That's number one, being able to put the line where you want it. So having the dexterity to be able to do that. And then we go into perspective and form, also known as proportion. Proportion is kind of like the culmination of understanding perspective and form in space. Then through that you get, well, it is a bit separate, because proportions is judging distances and angles. So most artists will say, and will always say, I need to work on my drawing. Always. This is like a continuous thing. So, and if that's the case, maybe the next 5 or 6 paintings, the next couple months, however you determine, you say, okay, my intention for these next few paintings are going to be focus on one aspect of this. So dexterity. You don't have to do that. Actually, it'd be better not to do that within painting. Do drawbox.com. Go through those lessons. That will improve your dexterity. It will also improve your fundamental understanding of perspective and proportion and judging distances, things like that. Yeah, close observation is part of it. Yeah, that's true. But everything I'm talking about is, observation. But I feel like I'm getting a bit off of topic here. The most important thing is that you identify your weak points, your weaknesses, and then you specifically attack them. You say, okay, this is my weakest point. Fantastic. You celebrate it. You celebrate the knowledge of it. Okay, I know this is my weakest point, and that's great. You don't beat yourself up about it. And then you set some practices for yourself to improve upon it. That is the fastest way to improve. It's like you get I see the questions. I haven't got this question yet from anybody, but it's like, how long does it take to be that good, or as good as you, or to do what you do? How long does it take to get there? Well, for me, it took exactly this long, because I've vlogged everything on my website, chrisbeaven.com, if you want to see every single day for the past 10 plus years. You can see it on my website. But the answer to that is it depends. Are you practicing deliberately? If you practice deliberately, you will improve at lightning speeds. I read Peak by Anders Ericsson probably a couple years ago. Yeah. Maybe a little bit longer. And that was a revelation, I tell you. And I remember thinking then that I wish I had read it, 10 years prior. Okay, pause for that discussion real quick. Here's what I'm looking at. So if you look at the highlights on this palm frond down here, they got this, in their entirety, they have this kind of angle. Do they kind of swoop at an arch, or are they separate for each one? I feel like we got this kind of overall angle moving throughout with all those highlights. Maybe it's just here at the end where it turns up a bit. Like if you grouped all those highlights together, it would make a line. What do you call that when we were talking about composition? Active recall here. I need to recall it myself. Oh geez, it's not leading lines. It's implied lines. So the highlights makes an implied line here. And I want to make sure that I get that because it's kind of nice how it's very nice how it forms this overall structure of the palm frond. Yeah, it informs the form really well. So, thinker, back to you. What, give it some thought. Don't answer really quickly. What is your biggest weak point? What's your weakness? Your greatest weakness right now in whatever art you're doing. Yeah, and that's it. What is your greatest weakness? And I'll help you formulate a plan to work on it, to attack it, and to get better quickly. And then, when you think about it, identify what you're weak at that if you improved would improve everything you do in art. Now we're getting into the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 principle. What is the 20% that you can do that will provide 80% of the results? It's an interesting proven mathematical anomaly, I guess, in statistics, where I think it was Alfredo or something, Wilfredo or something like that, the Fredo principle. He was looking at the distribution of income back in, I don't know, forever ago. And he found that 20% of the individuals in his hometown had 80% of the income. And then I think he applied it to a couple other things, but stopped on it. But then it was picked up by a scientist, I don't know, 100 or so years later. And he started applying it to all kinds of different things. Like, this is just an example. I don't know if it's true or not, but like on a chicken farm, 20% of all chickens produce 80% of all the eggs, maybe. I don't know. But there's all these places where the 80-20 principle was applied to, and it came out true. Lots of businesses look at, the 80-20 of, what they're doing. And they consistently find that there's 20% of their clients bring in 80% of their income or revenue. And also 20% of their clients bring in 80% of the problems. Right? So when you're thinking about what your weakest point is in art, and this is why I was saying, think about the fundamentals. Which fundamental in art do you struggle with right now? Are you weak on that will improve 80% of your art moving forward? Okay, I'm going to step back real quick. We got a section of the palm frond in, and I want to see if it looks authentic in some way. And when I say authentic, I mean there's a tendency when you're dealing with foliage, nature, for it to look kind of man-made and too, I don't know, generalized, I guess, not random enough. So that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, a lot of the angles aren't the best here. I'll probably start cleaning up some of those. And a lot of the edges are too sharp. So I'll do that real quick, and then I'll put it in the background. I'll put in those stripes in the background as well. For me, I think it's composition. I really like dramatic lighting when I see it. Light against dark, dark against light. But incorporating it in my own art is problematic. The other is color matching. Oh, nice. I could definitely help you with color matching. I love high contrast art as well. And, my vision for this tiger painting was super high contrast. And we'll probably get there eventually with the glazing that I want to go through on it. The composition. Wonderful, wonderful way to improve. Talk about 80-20 on your paintings. So through the live stream, I did, I don't know, was it 8 different live streams on nothing but composition? Because you were there for all of them, Thinker. And most of everything that I learned from composition was from the wonderful illustrators at the School for Visual Storytelling, svslearn.com. I have never been through a composition course better. There has never been any book more understandable, more informative, and more clear than the composition courses there. Specifically is the Creative Composition course by Will Terry. And everything that I pointed out on the live stream is basically somewhat of a copy of that. I've taken the principles that he's outlined, and the problem with what I've done in the live stream was it wasn't fully converted for oil painting. A lot of the ideas were illustrative in nature, which obviously, you could convert to oil painting anyways. Look at N.C. Wyeth, one of the best composers, of paintings, and he worked mainly in oil, I believe. So, but improving it. Okay, so improving your compositions. Go through the course. Do all the exercises in the course. It's very illustrative in nature. But that would be, I think, your highest leverage item. And if you focus on it, there's a free trial that they have. I think it's like a 14-day free trial. And if you go through the creative composition course, this is, you know, if you don't have the money, okay? Because it's such a good course. It's worth spending a month. I think it's like $25 for 1 month. But you can get more than that because you'll get 14 days free or something like that. And then, you know, 1 month is like $25. But just for that one course, I believe it's worth it, honestly. Or you can look back through at... The powerful part of that course is that they have... he's got exercises for you to do. And they take some time. And I went through them on my website. You can actually flip back through the daily art that I do, and you could see all the work that I did through those courses of creating my own illustrations, you know, really focusing on the principles that was outlined and applying them to illustrations that I created. Yeah. The other thing that you can do excuse me, I had to get some tea. The other thing you can do is go on, and I love ArtStation for this. Go on ArtStation and look at, I'm trying to think of what you can search for. And let me pause while I make a couple lines here. I want this to be the right angle, or the correct angle. Not a right angle, but a correct angle. Yeah. So go on ArtStation. And there's a ton of really like professional artists that do these black and white compositional studies where they kind of just make up compositions out of their head. Of course, you know, a lot of them are very similar in nature, but the principles that they're working with, which is just simple color or no color, maximum 3 values. So a black, a white, and a gray. And then just doing a ton of thumbnails. But Alright, this is taxing my brain, so I have to pause here. Notice how I'm going through what I just painted. That's important. Drawing through a form, especially with these, is going to be very helpful. And then going back through and just fixing up the palm fronds I've already established is going to be super easy. I'm not even worrying about the value for these right now. I'm just getting in the shape, and I can adjust what's down easily. I think if you go onto ArtStation and search for compositional sketches, you'll come up with all these black and white sketches. The problem with those sketches is, for most of them, they're concepts that you don't understand. So, an artist has a concept for a person walking through a field that has a river, and it's a sunset with striking clouds, and or something like that. So they have an idea, and maybe they've illustrated that well, maybe they haven't. So if you do something like that, the most important part is the idea first. Remember, on the design process. The design process document that I created, and that's available for download, was created straight from the Society of Visual Storytelling, or the School of Visual Storytelling. I always want to say that because they had changed their name once. The School of Visual Storytelling, the entire creative composition course, I created that document based on it. And the very first thing is understanding your idea. What do you want to illustrate in this composition? I've seen professional concept artists, start with nothing and just play around and then come up with the idea after that. So that's one possibility. You can do it that way. But that's not really what happens for me. It may be something that happens for you as far as, your process for painting, but usually I get the idea first. Like perseverance within a tiger, right? The idea came first, and then we try to build the composition around that. So any of these, and the great thing about it, these are quick things because you're focusing on one aspect of your art. So you look at the examples on ArtStation and what these little black and white compositional sketches look like, right? You can do them digitally. They're quicker, maybe digitally, or pencil and paper works really well because that's all you need. And you do them small. You do them like the size of a business card. Really small things. And then you just come up with ideas. Or another thing you can do is you look at, go to your local gallery and find, or go online, search for, person in landscape or something like that, a painting. And you look at novice paintings. And you look at their composition and you think, well, how can I improve that composition? Because I see that this person is trying to paint maybe someone else in front of a house in a field with, the sun overhead and a tree in the background. How can I improve that composition? And then you do a black and white study of it, and then that's done. You're done with it, right? Do another one. Do 10 of them for the same composition, okay? And then make notes on each one. Remember the proven science for improving fast. One of the things you must have is feedback. But for the most case, artists don't have ability to get feedback all the time or from anybody else. They have to do it themselves. So the best thing for you to do is to have that plan, identify, like you did, identify composition as your weak point, and focus on that. Make sure that you are doing something that's a little bit outside of your comfort zone, which you're working on it, so you know you're not up to speed on it as much as you would like to be, so it's going to be outside of your comfort zone. You set aside time for it and you focus on it. Focus is also really, really important. Not only just focus in the moment, like you don't do it someplace where you're going to get distracted all the time, like TV's on, video game playing, let me do some sketching. No. That's not the best place to improve. So you have focus on not only what you're doing, what you want to improve, but focus in the moment. It's outside your comfort zone. And then you provide yourself feedback as you go through it. You do a composition and you say, okay, did that achieve what I wanted? Yes or no? Kind of like I'm doing right now. So I'm looking at, actually I gotta move my phone away because it's in the way. Yeah, right in front of the pallet's not a good idea. We gotta move that. Okay, as I was talking with you about this, which is a great question, by the way. Thank you so much. I don't like the angle on these down here. It's not as dynamic. It got very mechanical. So I'm gonna have to paint over a lot of that. Really cool. Does that make sense, Thinker? I know I kind of, because I'm doing two things at once, it's easier to focus on, you know, giving you the, you know, a working method for improving on one thing at a time. If I was focusing on that, it's harder to do it when I'm trying to paint and do it at the same time. Hey, that's awesome. It's something I'm improving upon. So, you gotta practice it. I can focus on it. That would actually make a really good video to help others. Really simplify the biggest points in Peak by Anders Ericsson. Really, that's the heart of the book. Is his equation for deliberate practice. I have the book in the other room, but I'm gonna write that down as an idea and a video that I'll produce eventually. I was hoping to get this palm prawn done today, but that was really inaccurate of me because it's complex. The complexity here is tremendous. But let me check in. Did that make sense, Thinker? Do you have a clear objective? A clear path to improvement? Please say no if it's not perfectly clear. and let me know exactly what you're not clear on. I'll see if I can explain a bit further. Yeah, I think the problem with these is you can tell on the image that they all will eventually run into kind of one place. So there's a convergence of all these lines, and I don't have that. It's a very subtle convergence. So that one there, and then I think I'll bring this one. I think before I end the stream today, number one, I want to answer any questions you may have. And number two, I think I'm going to go over everything that I put down and soften up all the edges. But before I do that, I'm going to stand back real quick. Oh, it is so important to stand back away from your artwork. This is the part where feedback happens, where you can, really get away from your work that you do and get an understanding of where it's at. So I definitely want to soften up all these edges. I am somewhat happy with the value. It's a bit lighter than I want, but going into the subsequent layers, here we are in the chess game again, planning ahead. I think the lighter values are going to be work to our advantage. I'm pretty happy with a lot of the shapes, except for one of those leaves I don't like. Two of those leaves I don't like, so I'm going to focus on those first. But that's a drawing aspect. I want to get the drawing covered. We'll get the drawing on first. I mean, that's like the foundation, one of the foundations for any representational art you do. Or realism, I guess. Representational, it doesn't have to be realism. Okay, that looks better. And I don't like this one here. Let's thin it out a bunch. They all want to come to some kind of point. Kind of like me. Get to the point, Chris. I ramble too much. Well, what, yeah, I was waiting for any questions there, Thinker, but I'll go on to your next thing that you were talking about was color matching. And I said this once before, about, you know, possibly, you know, actually I have it down as an idea for a video that I want to create. This, you know, making color matching as simple as possible. And you do that by really just asking 3 questions. To match any color, there's really just 3 questions you need to focus on. And those 3 questions are surrounding the principles of color, value, or hue, value, saturation. So for example, let's say, you know, and you have to think about relativity in some ways, but we won't get into that just yet. Let's say we're just matching a color. Yeah, let me illustrate it here real quick. Because this will happen a lot. Is, you know, let's say I have a dark color, this green that I mixed up here, that has gone through a lot of mixes. I'm trying to make it so it doesn't have any glare for you. Maybe I need to go this way. No, that's a lot less glare. So let's say I'm trying to mix up this green. The first thing I'm going to do is think about what colors I have on my palette or in my paint box that might be the closest to that. And it's definitely a grayish green. You know, on the color wheel, it would be, you know, on this side of the color wheel where all the greens are, but it would be very close to the center. Sap green is really close to the center, but I think something that's closer is this Courbet green, because sap green, you see where sap green is? It's up here with the cadmium green, which is a very kind of yellowy green. So I kind of see possibly that it's closer to this Courbet green in some way. All right, and then I put down what I think is closer. And it could be way off. I mean, I could pick, maybe all I have is an ultramarine blue or the sap green. And that's fine too, because the questions I'm going to ask of this color will all be the same, and we can still arrive there. The only place that you couldn't arrive is if you're trying to match something that's outside of your palette's ability. The sun is outside of your palette's ability. You would have to darken up the entirety of the painting to get the color of the sun. Or some of those hyper blues or hyper greens that you see, like for signs on the interstate that reflect and things like that. Those greens are way out of paint's ability. So you'd have to make some changes, but we're not worried about that. So then you see this color, and it's obviously different in some way, and you ask the question, does it need to be lighter or darker? That's value. That's number one. That's, as long as you got that on, that's, you know, you're cool. Yeah, everything else can kind of be different in some way. And this obviously needs, well, it's obvious for me because I'm right in front of it, not through a camera. It needs to be lighter. Not tremendously lighter, but it needs to be lighter. The second question you ask is, does it need to be more saturated or less saturated? Now, considering that this is right out of the tube, and we have a gray here on the palette, almost 90% of the time, it will need to be less saturated. This definitely needs to be less saturated. So lighter, less saturated, Now, the third question is, does it need to be warmer or cooler? So closer to a bluish tone or closer to a reddish tone? Well, I think it needs to be cooler. So we got three things. It needs to be lighter, it needs to be less saturated, and it needs to be closer to blue, like a cooler color. Now, what on my palette would do that? All with one. The first thing I think about is maybe a blue. It needs to be cooler, but that's really dark, right? My ultramarine blue is probably the same value as this, so that's not going to make it lighter. The cerulean blue is lighter, but that's super intense. It's not really going to change the intensity. It's not going to bring the intensity of this down. Okay, so I need a lighter color that's less intense and blue. The only thing that I have on my palette for that is white. So I'll bring in just a little bit of white, a tiny bit, because this is a dark color, and we'll mix it. Okay. And then, because it's all relative, you test it. So you made one change, and now let's test it. I'm going to put it right next to here. Well, that was pretty close already, honestly. But there is a difference. You probably can't tell on camera because cameras don't pick up the subtleties that your eyes can. But it's a bit more intense than the color I'm trying to make. So I need to, and it's the exact same value. The value's on. As I squint, that will remove the hue, and I can see that the value's on. It just needs to be less intense. So I need to find, and this is a green color, so an orange will bring, some less intensity into it. And I need to use a color that is similar in value that will bring this down. And I think the transparent earth orange would do that. So let's try that. Yeah, that definitely brought the intensity down. And then let's test it. Let's put it right here. Yeah, that's pretty much dead on. Hopefully that process was understandable. I go through the same process all the time within seconds. And the more you do it, the quicker you get at it. Lighter or darker, more saturated, less saturated, warmer or cooler. Lighter or darker, more saturated, less saturated, warmer or cooler. Value, chroma, hue. Value, chroma, hue. In that order. Of course, I think it's kind of second nature now because I've been doing it for years. I guess the third part of that is to always test it because color is relative. Over here, it will look like one thing. Once you put it with, what you want on a painting in a small daub or something, then you get a real understanding of it. Colors react to what's around them. Well, they don't react. Your eyes actually react in some way. Your eyes tell you that, that is good or it's not. Or it's right on or it's not. If you have a blue background with a yellow circle in the center, and then you have a yellow background with a blue circle in the center, that yellow circle or the yellow is going to look brighter in one than it does in the other because of what's around it, what's surrounding it. That's relativity. And you can use that to your advantage in a lot of ways. Like I did down here, I just mixed up a gray that's a little bit close to green and bam, there we are. As they say, Bob's your uncle. It worked well. You can create a whole painting based on grays, staying within one hue and just change, how close to the center of the color wheel it is or not. And that's all about, you know, just color relativity, honestly. Okay, so last thing I want to do today is soften all of these hard edges out. I don't want any of these hard edges. They're too distracting. We can bring in hard edges later. I'm going to repeat this again. What is that saying? You know, repetition is the mother of invention? No. Is that right? Well, if you really want to learn something, you know, practice, repetition, spaced repetition basically is the way to learn it. It's easier to sharpen up edges on dry paint than it is to soften edges on dry paint. And that's with any paint. Except for gouache, because you can just reactivate it. But even then, it's kind of like and maybe watercolor. Maybe you can do that with watercolor. I don't know if you can reactivate watercolor once it's down. I think you can. But with oil paint, soften out. You know, go softer than you think at the beginning. You can always stiffen up those edges later. So I'm using a very long, flat, soft brush. Just lightly scrubbing over everything that I've done. And it's going to soften everything out. It's kind of ghostly because it's bringing some of this paint into the darker areas, and so it's lightening up the darker areas as well, which is totally fine. Softening up the transition in tones from one side of these palm fronds to the other. Okay, that is sufficiently soft. Sufficiently soft. Did my previous message get through? Oh no, it did not. That's weird. Absolutely makes sense. Great. Good. You know what? I'm right after we're done with the stream, I'm gonna write that down as a video idea because it's a wonderful question that I think a lot of artists want to know. How do I get good fast? Yeah. And it's wonderful to actually have science behind it. I'm telling you, Peak by Anders Ericsson is a fantastic book. It's why Malcolm Gladwell got famous as well, because he took the whole 10,000 hour idea and really kind of blew it up in his book Outliers, which is another fantastic book. Not for the whole 10,000 hour idea, but for all of the other aspects of, you know, becoming successful in some way, you know, being an outlier. 2 books there for artists I would suggest that you read. Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell and Peak by Anders Ericsson. Read Peak by Anders Ericsson first. Definitely. Yep. Also Atomic Habits by James Clear. Essential, really. If you want to create an art habit, if you want to get better at anything, you got to have a habit behind it, a consistent habit. All right, we're about almost an hour and a half into this. I've talked about a lot of things. I've got a lot of wonderful ideas. Thank you so much, Thanker, for being here and asking questions. You help me improve as we work together. So fantastic. I didn't get the entire palm frond done, but hopefully we can get the rest of it done on tomorrow's live stream. And speaking of tomorrow's live stream, I will be here at the same time as today. So I will see you tomorrow. Have a wonderful rest of your day.